3, 2, 1, 0.
Welcome to Jet Propelled. In this video that is going to take you into a little bit of our workflow. This is a photograph that we were doing some post-work retouching on. First thing we're doing right now is we're just going to very quickly zip through a clipping path just to prepare our photo or part of what we do with it later. Usually this takes about 5 minutes. We're going to zip through it in a couple seconds here and we're almost done. And there, we have a clipping path. Okay. Now, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this layer and we're going to go in and just remove some of the imperfections we have here. In this case, there are just some hairs that we're going to remove. We're using a spot healing brush in order to do this. I'm not going to get too technical in this video, and we're not going to really spend a ton of time on this kind of thing. We'll sort of breeze through this stuff quickly. Again, usually something like this will take a few minutes. We're going to kind of zip through that in a couple of seconds. Now, one thing that we want to be sure to do is not to remove any identifying marks in an individual. More so, we just want to remove anything like wrinkles and hairs and that kind of thing, possibly blemishes. But in most cases, again, we want the person to look like the person they are. Now what we're doing is we are creating a base layer and a couple of other working layers that are going to help us separate the frequency of the texture of the skin with the color of the skin so that we can actually edit them independent of each other. Okay, first thing we're going to work on is the color layer, which is going to be blurred out. And the blurring process is going to help us to even out those skin tones a little bit. It's almost like having a makeup artist in your post-work in your office. So you'll see why in just a minute. Next thing we're going to do is we are going to play with the frequency. Okay, so the frequency again is just the texture of the skin. We're applying that onto the blur layer so that combined together, once we apply the proper overlay on it, that it is going to look just like the original image. Okay, so those two layers combined now look like the original. Okay, now what we're going to do is we are going to work on the blur layer, okay, which again is the color. Okay, and we are going to circle areas that we want to even out the skin tone. We're going to blur them even more. Okay, you'll see that in a second. And that again is just in order to even out the skin tone a little bit better. Again, this process takes a few minutes. We're just going to zip through that in a few seconds, but you can see the different areas that we are focusing on. And then for the most part, we're able to use the same level of blur, but on the nose, I find we just back it off a little bit. Great. Okay, now we're going to adjust the color a little bit. We're going to work on a black and white layer, and we are going to reduce the red channel within that black and white layer and deepen and darken those reds. And then we're going to change the transparency of that so that it just builds that in a little bit, just brings it in a little bit. No major adjustments here, just minor adjustments bit by bit. Okay, this is going to deepen this red in this gentleman's skin tone. And then we are going to create another monochrome black and white layer. And we're going to back that right off to nothing and just ease it in a little bit to desaturate this. And now we've got some really deep, rich colors without being oversaturated. Now this is an interesting part of the process where we are going to create a dodge and burn layer. So the dodging and burning is just basically increasing the highlights and increasing the darkness in the shadows. It's going to create a really interesting look that I think will suit this portrait well. Okay, again, this part of the process is done on its own layer that is non-destructive, so at any point if we want to revert back to something or change or remove, it's very easy to adjust. We're not actually making any change to the photograph itself. This is just a layer over top of it that you'll see where we'll be able to increase the highlights and increase the depth of the shadows. Okay, you can see we're going through and increasing the highlighted points in the eyes as well. And we're not doing anything dramatic. Again, everything that we do is just a minor step, and we'll go through this a little bit quickly. Again, it takes a few minutes to do that. Okay, and in the clothing, we can get a really great look in any wrinkles in shirts or jeans or pants or anything like that. It looks really nice. And then we move on to burning in the shaded areas. Okay, so we're going to find those areas of shaded skin and darkness that border along the areas that we just highlighted. And we're going to just darken those a little bit. And we'll move through this a little bit quickly as well. Again, just a few minutes, but the more time you spend on this, the better it's going to look in the end. It's definitely worth spending a little bit of time and attention on this for the overall benefit of the finished product. Okay, now we can see the difference there, the before and after. It just gives it, again, a little bit of a high contrast look, which is a specific style that I think, again, works well for this portrait. Now we have duplicated the frequency layer, which, again, is the texture of the skin. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we've masked it, and we're just going to paint it in certain areas, like where the eyebrows are, and the eyes, and eyelashes, and even in the hair in a minute. Now what that's going to do, again, we'll back it off a little bit. We just want to make a tiny adjustment here in the end. But what that's going to do is that's going to increase the sharpness and the overall texture of those areas with hair. Now we're going to add an adjustment layer for our hue and saturation. We're just going to increase the saturation of the color of the eyes. It's always a nice thing to do. Again, we don't want to make anything too dramatic. We don't want the person to look like an alien or anything like that, but increasing the contrast in the levels, increasing the levels and also increasing the saturation are nice if it's done tactfully. Great. Okay, now from here we are going to take a look at everything together. So we're going to group all of these layers, and I'll be able to show you before and after. So this is where we're at now versus where we started. Okay, and now we are going to take that wonderful clipping path that we made earlier. We took some time to get in really close and do a nice clipping path. We're going to take that, find it on our layers palette, make the selection, and we're going to apply that to our overall group of everything that we did. Okay. Now, the reason why we're doing this is because we're going to sort of generate a fake backlight here. So we're going to create a radial gradient. So just a nice soft white ball of light. It's a linear light right now. We're going to change that in a second. To a radial. There we go. Now we're going to bring that down, and we're going to scale it out in its opacity in just a second, so that, again, it's just a subtle change. Each step just a little subtle change. And then we're going to darken the bottom of this photo, okay, with a linear gradient. Again, I don't want to get too technical on any of these points, so we're not taking a lot of time on this, but just good to give you a window into the different steps and techniques that we use to create the finished product. Okay, now what we're going to do is we are going to create sort of a cinematic duotone color gradient here. You can see we're starting off with a warm color, and we're going to add a nice sort of teal color to it. And we were going to just embed that really into the skin and the overall foreground of the photograph, back it right off, and then just subtly bring it right in. And that'll give it just a nice, subtle, cinematic look to it. Okay, and we're going to, now that we've got all that done, we're going to just make an adjustment to our curves, which is just the relationship of the highlights and shading overall. So we're making a global adjustment here. Okay, and find the right setting that I think is going to work for this, and we'll probably back off that color gradient a little bit, I think. And that's it. I think that looks good for our final product. What we're going to do is we're going to duplicate the base layer. We're going to bring that right to the top, and we're going to ease that into the photograph as well. And what that does, it sort of tones down all of the work we did right now. Again, priority towards having subtle changes. So when we back that off into the base layer again, we're sort of making these changes even that much more subtle. And we can see the before and after. And I think that looks good. I'm pretty happy with that. Hopefully you enjoyed that video. Thank you very much.
3, 2, 1, 0.